Hey guys, tonight we're heading into the deep freeze of early American frontier life. Picture this. You're standing outside your log cabin at twilight, breath turning to fog in the biting air, hands rough from chopping wood, and the silence of snow falling so thick you can barely see the tree line. Inside, the wind whistles through the gaps in your walls, and the fire crackles, small, maybe too small for what's coming. It's winter now, and not the storybook kind with sleigh bells and mittens, the kind that tries to kill you. You probably won't survive this, so, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, post where you're listening from, and what time it is right now. Always love seeing where you all tune in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first snow doesn't come politely. It smacks you in the face with a sheet of wind and a sudden silence that says, "Yep, it's begun." There's no weather app here, no Doppler radar. You've been watching the birds disappear, the air stilling into brittle quiet, and your joints aching like an old barn door, your only forecast. So you pick up the axe again. You're cutting wood like your life depends on it, because, frankly, it does. A single adult needs nearly a full cord of wood per month to keep a fire going through harsh northern winters. That's a pile as tall and wide as a horse-drawn wagon. And if you didn't start in summer, you're already behind. Your fingers go numb halfway through the third log. You rub them fast, jam them under your armpits, and keep swinging. The blisters are already scabbing. You can't feel the cold anymore, which is when it gets dangerous. Inside the house, you've got a one-room log cabin your family of 5 sleeps in, eats in, coughs in. The wind snakes through the chinks in the logs, so you've stuffed moss, mud, even newspaper scraps if you're lucky enough to have them, into every crevice. Some families get clever, hanging woolen quilts over doorways, building inner partitions with extra hides, and putting up shelves to block direct wind flow. It's frontier insulation, and it mostly works, if the wind doesn't change direction. You hear the thud of snow falling from the roof. Your kid thinks it's wolves again. You pretend it doesn't make your heart jump. Speaking of roofs, did you know that early cabins had sod or bark roofing that leaked more than a bored teenager's diary? One good snowstorm, and you're sprinting around the cabin with buckets, trying to save your bedding from turning into swamp cloth. Some folks started laying pine boughs beneath their roofline, hoping the pitch would create a makeshift waterproofing. Spoiler, it didn't. But you do what you can. You've closed the shutters, basically wooden flaps you've nailed shut, because glass is a luxury. Windows are now just holes you hope animals don't crawl through. When you open the door, it takes 2 people to shove the snow aside enough to get out. There's this eerie stillness once the snow settles. Everything is muffled. You could shout, and only the trees would listen. That's when the dread creeps in, because this is just the beginning. You've stored what you could, jars of beans, strips of smoked meat, baskets of root vegetables. But you're doing the mental math already. 17 jars, 2 potatoes a day, 7 mouths. That puts you into February before you're licking bark. You try not to think about last year's winter, when your neighbor downriver froze, trying to break the ice on his well. You found him curled like a comma under a cedar tree, water bucket still in his mittens. Historians still argue whether these early deaths were due to underpreparedness or just a cruel learning curve of surviving off-grid. Either way, it wasn't uncommon for new settlers to underestimate the brutality of the cold. One pamphlet in 1817 even marketed frontier life with the phrase, "fresh air and freedom," which is hilarious if you've ever tried to breathe through frostbitten nostrils while fighting off bronchitis in a house with no insulation. There's this thing your grandmother swears by, onion skins in your socks to keep the chill out. It smells terrible, sure, but who's judging? You'll do just about anything for warmth, including sleeping in your daytime clothes, 2 coats, and someone else's trousers layered over your own. Here's the funny bit. Most people assume the worst part is the cold, It's not. It's the darkness. Days shrink to grey slivers, and by 4:30 p.m., you're fumbling for kindling, staring at a window that reflects only your own anxious face. So you tell stories. You play fiddle if someone still has one with intact strings. You patch clothes by firelight and pray the thread doesn't run out. Someone inevitably mentions the winter of '29, and everyone groans, half in fear, half in tradition. Do you know what's weird? Some folks used to track winter by how many ears of corn they had to burn. Not in a good year, but when firewood ran out, corn cobs became kindling. They burn fast and smell like regret. There's even a recorded account from Minnesota settlers who burned their furniture, plank by plank, just to make it to March. Out back, your chickens have stopped laying. They're huddled in the coop like feathery goblins. You're trying to keep them alive without wasting precious body heat, but some nights, you swear they're judging you. Another gust rattles the door. The fire sputters. You feed it another log, an expensive gesture, and pull your coat tighter. You wake before the sun, and the first thing you do is check your breath, literally. If you can see it puff out in front of your face, it means the fire's gone cold. Again, you throw off the covers and tiptoe across the frozen floor, teeth chattering, muttering something unholy under your breath. Every board groans. The stove's gone black, and your fingers already sting as you rake through the ashes, hoping for a coal. Nothing. You'll have to start from scratch. Again, this is when insulation matters, and spoiler, you don't have much. Your cabin walls are made of stacked logs, but let's be honest, it's basically a house made of twigs and hope. The spaces between the logs, called chinks, are stuffed with a mix of clay, straw, mud, or anything else you could shove in last fall. You even threw in a handful of old newspaper clippings from when some traveling trader passed through. Now there's a brittle headline stuck in your wall that reads "Gold found in California," but it does less for your fortune and more for the wind. The cold is a living thing. It snakes through the walls, curls around your toes, and whispers things like, "You should have moved to Georgia." You respond by hammering another hide across the doorway. Your last deerskin smells like meat. Still, inside the cabin, there's a strange layering system going on. Not just for clothes, but for everything. You've got an inner room if you're lucky, and that's where everyone sleeps. Thick quilts are hung on the walls like medieval tapestries, not for style, but because each added layer of fabric might mean one more degree of warmth. The floor. Dirt. Most of the time, anyway. Some folks laid down wooden planks if they had spare lumber, or didn't burn it during last year's freak freeze. But in many cabins, you're walking on compacted earth, stamped flat, swept with a broom of tied sticks, and occasionally wet from snow tracked in on boots and dog paws. It holds the cold like a grudge. To stay ahead of the frost, some frontier families actually built double walls, 2 layers of logs with a few inches of packed sawdust or moss in between. Sounds clever, right? It was. But it also meant twice the logs, twice the labor, and twice the time. Most of your neighbors didn't bother, or they started and gave up halfway through, which is why the Johnson place down the road looks like half a sandwich. Historians still argue whether the double wall method came from Scandinavian immigrants or developed independently among different settler groups. Either way, those who pulled it off survived winters with a few more teeth in their heads. There's a constant war happening between what's inside and what's trying to get in. Moisture from your breath starts freezing on the nails. The kettle freezes if you don't move it close enough to the fire. Your bread box turns into a brick locker. And the worst offender? Windows. If you're lucky enough to have glass panes, and that's a huge if, you're dealing with frost so thick it looks like someone painted lace across every surface. Pretty sure, but deadly. That pretty frost steals the warmth, and it turns your breath into icicles on the sill. That's why so many cabins didn't have real windows. Just open holes shuttered with wood, covered in oiled paper, or sealed with horn slats. Yes, horn. Some folks stretched thin animal horn to make translucent window coverings. You can kind of see out, sort of, if you squint and pretend. Mostly, you just stare at the shadows and hope they're trees. At night, it gets worse. That's when you start appreciating every trick in the book. Heated rocks, warmed in the fire and wrapped in cloth, tucked under beds or blankets. The rocks cool fast, but for those first 30 minutes, they're your best friend. You wish you could name them. Probably should. Greg the warm rock deserves some respect. Then there's the straw mattress. Actually, straw tick is the right term. A fabric sack stuffed with straw or hay that you've fluffed up 3 times a week with a stick, unless you enjoy sleeping on a pancake of sadness. The straw isn't just for comfort. It's insulation. Though it does come with the added fun of hay mites, occasional mold, and the slow realization that you're probably part of the bedding now too. Some families stuffed their walls with hay bales. That's right, inside the house. Just stacks of hay leaned against every wall, like you're trying to live inside a barn. A risky move, sure, especially if a spark flies from the fire. But when it's minus 20 degrees Fahrenheit outside, a little fire hazard sounds downright cozy. One lesser-known tidbit. Some settlers used snow banking. That's where you literally pile snow against your cabin walls to help insulate. It sounds backwards, but snow, when compacted, creates a barrier that traps heat in better than bare logs alone. Just don't let it melt too soon, or you'll be ankle-deep in regret. You fix another drafty spot with a nail and some leather scrap. Your fingers are red. You step back and look around the cabin. It's dim, warm near the stove, freezing by the walls. Every surface has a task: drying mittens, hanging herbs, storing jerky, or keeping the baby from crawling into the ash bucket. And here's the kicker. You can do everything right, seal every seam, bank the snow, double wall your home, and still freeze your teeth off because the winter doesn't care. It's not cruel, just consistent. As you pull the blanket tighter around your shoulders and poke at the fire again, you realize something. The house creaks, the wind moans, and you're still here. And that's saying something. Even if your socks are frozen to the floorboards, by the time night falls, and it falls early, you're already counting how many blankets you've got, who gets which one, and how to layer them in a way that avoids another midnight wrestling match with the corner quilt. There's no thermostat here. Just wool, human bodies, and the burrito method. It starts like this. First, you lay down whatever passes for a mattress: straw tick, bear hide, even pine branches if you're really roughing it. Then you throw on every available quilt, blanket, hide, and ragged scrap of fabric you can find. The goal? Build a nest so thick that the cold has to knock 3 times before getting in. You crawl in, fully clothed, sometimes in 2 layers of pants, 2 shirts, and a scarf tied around your nose. If it's one of those, your eyelashes freeze shut nights, you'll even wear your hat and mittens to bed. Socks are non-negotiable. Preferably wool, but you've stuffed straw in the toes before. Desperate times. And then comes the sleeping order. This is no free-for-all. Frontier families had a system. Eldest and frailest in the middle, kids on the outside, the warmest human heaters, usually farmhands or older teens, at the ends. Dogs and cats, absolutely welcome. Tucked under arms or curled at your feet, they're the unsung heroes of the survival game. They don't get fancy names like Greg the Rock, but they're warmer. Historians still argue whether these family piles were a matter of affection or pure survival instinct. Either way, no one's winning any privacy awards. You breathe in the musky smell of wool, sweat, and wood smoke, trying not to cough. The air is thick with trapped breath, but you know if you stick your nose out, it'll feel like an icicle, so you bury deeper. Your breath warms the space between fabric and chin, and soon you've created a pocket of almost comfort. Almost. Then someone kicks you. A leg jabs into your ribs. A child thrashes in a fever dream. Your sibling starts snoring in your ear. You consider exile, then remember the frost outside the blanket wall and decide to love them again, just for tonight. And if you're sleeping on a raised bed, which some wealthier or better prepared families manage to cobble together. It's a game changer. Cold air sinks, so anything off the ground is gold. But even a raised platform doesn't save you if the draft sneaks in from the floorboards. So you drape everything, sides of the bed, edge of the frame, even the space under it. No fabric is wasted. That old skirt Aunt Marjorie left behind? Now a bed skirt. Function over fashion, darling. There's an art to how you position yourself, too. Fetal is best, tucks the toes in, and conserves warmth. Sprawling is reserved for summertime, when you can pretend you're royalty and not just a half-frozen burrito in a sod-roof taco shell. Let's not forget the chamber pot. It's under the bed or behind the stove, and every time someone uses it at night, you brace yourself. Not for the sound, but for the cold air that comes in when they throw off the blankets. A whoosh of Arctic terror invades your cocoon and lingers just long enough to haunt your dreams. The pot itself. Ice cold. If you're brave, you warm it near the stove first. If not, you squeal and deal. Now, you might wonder, why didn't people just heat the whole cabin more? Simple. Fuel. That fire you love so much. It eats through logs like a beaver with anger issues. You're burning precious wood every hour, and someone has to get up during the night to feed it. That someone is probably you, or someone you guilted into doing it with promises of extra stew tomorrow. Miss a feeding, and by morning, the fire is dead and your water bucket is a solid ice lump. Some settlers used banked fires to stretch the heat, covering the embers with ashes before bed to keep them alive longer. If done right, you can stir them back to life in the morning with kindling and breath. If done wrong, congratulations, you've just smoked out your cabin. One quirky trick? Baking stones. You heat large rocks in the fire, then bury them in the straw bed or place them under your feet. They radiate heat for hours. The downside? If someone forgets to wrap the stone in cloth, someone else gets burned feet. But hey, at least they're warm burns. There's also the hot brick under the covers method. Wrap it tight, place it at your feet, and hope it stays warm until dawn. Some families even built box-like foot warmers filled with embers. Effective if you enjoy the thrill of possibly setting your blanket on fire. As you try to drift off, wrapped like a tamale and squished like laundry in a suitcase, the night outside continues its slow, freezing crawl. You hear the wind outside shift. The house creaks again. You remember a neighbor swearing he once heard the sound of trees cracking from the cold, like bones snapping in the distance. He may have been drunk, but now you can't unhear it. Sleep doesn't come easy. Between the cold, the snoring, the wild temperature gradients between toasty under the covers and frozen nose tip, and the ever-present dread that a raccoon might sneak in, it's a battle. And yet, you sleep. Eventually, the rhythmic breathing of the pile lulls you. The fire crackles faintly, the blankets settle heavy on your chest, and for a few hours, you forget about the frozen world waiting on the other side of the door. Until someone elbows you in the eye at 3 a.m. Your eyes snap open before dawn, not from an alarm clock. Those don't exist here, but because your toes feel like they've been cryogenically frozen and reattached with wishful thinking. You wiggle them under the covers and hope they're still part of you. Getting out of bed in a frontier cabin during the dead of winter. That's not a casual stretch and yawn affair. It's an act of courage, a leap of faith, a borderline spiritual awakening. You toss off the blanket, instantly regret it, and sprint across the cabin like you're in a survival reality show. Your breath bursts into the air in little ghost clouds as you fumble with the firewood. Your hands sting from the cold, but it's better than letting the chill seep deeper. Today's mission: keep your extremities. Your toes, fingers, ears, and nose are in a constant state of negotiation with the weather. And frankly, the weather doesn't bargain. You slide on 2 pairs of socks, wool if you're lucky, rabbit fur-lined if you're very lucky. Some folks sewed squirrel fur into their shoes. Others stuffed straw or old newspaper into their boots. One woman in Vermont reportedly lined her boots with roasted apple peels and claimed it smelled like victory. Historians still argue whether that was genuine innovation or delirium from frostbite. You're careful not to touch the iron stove with bare skin. It'll burn you before you can blink. You've learned that the hard way, twice. Now you use a scrap of leather or your thick mittens to lift the kettle. The water inside? Half frozen, because of course it is. Chamber pots are next, and you don't want to deal with them, but you have to. The contents are frozen into eerie, glistening stalagmites. You make a mental note to dump them soon before they become geological features. Outside, the world looks deceptively calm. The snow sparkles under a sliver of moonlight. A light wind moves across the land, and you can hear it whispering through the trees. Sometimes it almost sounds like voices. You shake that thought off quickly. Too early for ghosts. You bundle up, grabbing your coat, scarf, mittens, and hat. Most hats aren't stylish. One's made from a skunk. You don't talk about that hat. You just wear it and hope people keep their opinions to themselves. The outhouse is a whole adventure, a cruel, biting, pants-down adventure. You trek across snow that crunches underfoot like shattered glass, clutching your coat tighter with every step. You hope no one else has used the seat before you today, because sitting down on a surface colder than death itself is one way to learn humility fast. You come back in shivering. Your fingers burn as they thaw, a pain so sharp it makes you whimper. You toss another log on the fire and huddle close, palms out. Your breath slowly returns to normal. Your heart rate slows. You survived another morning. The cold doesn't just hit once. It's a background hum that shapes every second of your day. You don't sit unless it's by the fire. You don't wash unless you want to play Will My Hair Freeze Solid? Spoiler, it will. One poor soul in Pennsylvania tried to wash his socks outside and had them freeze mid-air. He later used them as fire pokers. You check your boots. If they're near the fire, they're dry, but risk becoming stiff as planks. If they're too far, they might have frozen overnight. Some settlers used to sleep with their boots under the covers. Romantic? Not quite. More like sweaty and practical. Your hands are raw, cracked. The skin on your knuckles splits open sometimes just from flexing. You rub them with tallow or bear grease if you've got any left. It stinks, but it soothes. A neighbor once swore by raccoon fat, said it soaked in better. No one questioned her, mostly because she carried a knife and had strong opinions. Cold seeps into your bones by mid-afternoon. Even if you've been indoors, working near the fire, cooking, mending, there's always a draft, always that one spot that never warms. You start to dream of warm feet the way others dream of gold or adventure. Here's a quirky one for you. Some frontier folks heated bricks or flat stones in the fire and slipped them into homemade footboxes, basically wooden crates with a blanket draped over. You stick your feet in, tuck the blanket, and suddenly you've got a mini sauna. It's a clever hack. Until you forget the stone's too hot and your socks start to smoke. At night, the game repeats. You use the burrito method again. Tuck, roll, huddle. This time, you place a warm stone in a sock and tuck it down by your feet. You cross your fingers that no one shifts during the night and knocks it out into the cold void under the bed. And when you wake at 2 a.m., guess what? Toes are cold again. One scholar once wrote that frontier cold was less a temperature and more a personality. That sounds dramatic until you've tried to sleep while your breath turns to frost on your pillowcase and your dog gives up and burrows under the quilt like a spooning human. But you get used to it, or at least you stop complaining because everyone else is cold too. Still, there's one thing you never quite accept. The moment when you have to pull your hand out from the covers to feed the fire, light the lantern, or reach for the chamber pot. That moment, the sting, the gasp, the slow numbness that creeps from fingertips to wrist is always new. Every single night, you wake to the smell of something vaguely edible, or at least hot. Your stomach growls louder than the wind outside, and that's saying something. Food on the frontier isn't about luxury or flavor. It's about calories. Survival math. You need to eat, or you become the person others whisper about who tried to cook leather shoes. Breakfast is a guessing game. Maybe leftover cornbread, maybe a few beans, or, if you're lucky, bone broth bubbling weakly over the fire. You shuffle toward the hearth, eyes squinting in the smoky glow. The stew pot hangs heavy, crusted on the outside with soot and black from years of open fire cooking. Inside is a questionable mix of yesterday's rabbit scraps, the last of the turnips, and something you're pretty sure started out as a pine cone, but has softened nicely. You stir it with a wooden spoon, so worn down, it's basically a twig with ambition. In truth, stews are the frontier's MVP. One pot, one fire. You keep it simmering all day, tossing in whatever you find, trap, or remember exists at the bottom of the barrel. Roots, beans, dried herbs, the better half of a smoked squirrel. No two stews taste the same. Some taste like sadness, others like hope with a hint of onion. Mainstream historical records praise these stews as economical, nutritious, and efficient. But you know the real story. It's the art of making desperation taste just okay. You take a sip and feel it hit your ribs like a warm handshake. Calories, warmth, salt. It's enough to keep you chopping wood and pretending this is normal. Meat's scarce now, and the cold hasn't made hunting any easier. So what do? You get creative. There's a jar of pickled eggs on the shelf, maybe a little green around the edges, but still technically edible. Dried mushrooms from the fall harvest, if the mice didn't beat you to them. Acorns boiled and rinsed a dozen times to get the bitterness out. It works, mostly. Somewhere in the middle of your second bowl you remember, it's Sunday. You might actually crack open that brick-hard loaf of bread you've been hoarding. You knock it on the table, it thuds like a coffin lid, and carve off a hunk with your belt knife. It's dry, crumbly, tastes like sawdust, and still heaven. Quirky fact time. Some settlers used to keep bacon grease in a special crock by the fire and reused it indefinitely. You fry your flapjacks in it, rub it on your boots, and, rumor has it, some even rubbed it on their chests for vigor. Whether it worked or not. Historians still argue about that. But the smell certainly made you popular with the dog. Tea is creative. Pine needle tea is the go-to, high in vitamin C, sharp and citrusy, like drinking a Christmas tree. Some folks brewed spruce tips or boiled bark, yes, bark, and added a little honey or molasses if they had it. Others relied on old spice caches, hoarded like gold and doled out in whispers. Cinnamon was a miracle. Cloves, witchcraft. Water's tricky. You can't just dip a bucket in the creek anymore, it's frozen solid. So you melt snow. That's the nice way of saying you gather icy clumps in a battered pot, let it drip into something vaguely clean, and pray no one dropped anything organic upstream. You sit down to eat again by mid-afternoon. The sun's already flirting with the treetops. Dinner is stew. Again. But hey, this time it has a bone in it. You suck the marrow out like a frontier popsicle. Rich, fatty, deeply satisfying. You lean back, sigh, and for a moment, things feel okay. Until someone drops the wooden spoon and it shatters. Now there's only one left, and 3 people want it. Cutlery becomes weirdly valuable in winter. Knives are too cold to hold sometimes, so you learn to use them like surgical tools. Plates? Optional. Most meals happen out of shared bowls or straight from the pot. You keep washing to a minimum, because the water you'd need is more valuable for tea or foot soaking. And yet, there's a strange comfort in it. The rhythm. The ritual. The way you all crowd around the fire with your bowls balanced on knees, laughing weakly at some terrible joke someone made about the stew having personality. You remember one old neighbor's trick, drying apple peels on a string above the fire, then simmering them into a warm, spiced cider substitute. It didn't taste like cider, it tasted like warm fruit regret. But it lifted spirits. That's the secret out here, finding flavor in small things. A spoonful of molasses, a sliver of salt pork, a dried berry hidden in the oatmeal. One family you knew dipped bread crusts in honey and called it dessert. Another buried apples in sawdust in the root cellar and rationed them out like sacred offerings. And when all else fails, there's always squirrel jerky. You hang it over the mantel, chewy and leathery, but surprisingly good if you don't think too hard about what part of the squirrel you're chewing on. Some pieces are stringy. By nightfall, the stew's been boiled down to a paste, scraped into a jar, and tucked away. It'll show up again tomorrow with new ingredients. You joke that the stew's name is Tuesday, no matter what day it is. It's immortal, eternal. A pot of memories, both questionable and cherished. Outside, the stars begin to prick through the clouds. The cold creeps back in. And you're warm for now. Full enough to sleep. And that's worth more than a banquet in some fancy city hotel. As you stoke the fire and nestle back into your blanket cocoon, the last taste of stew still on your tongue, you whisper into the dark. Please don't make me eat boiled bark tomorrow. The fire crackles low, casting a soft orange glow across the cabin walls. You're just about to drift off, again, when a sound slices through the dark like a whisper with teeth. Howl, coyote, or wolf? You can't quite tell. Out here there's little difference when it's 2 a.m. and the windows are nothing but wooden flaps. Either way, something's pacing out there. You feel it. This is where the night really begins. Out on the frontier, someone always keeps watch. It's not a formal job. There's no guard shift, no walkie-talkie handoff. It's more like a silent agreement. Someone wakes up, hears something, and just knows it's their turn. Tonight, that someone is you. You pull on your coat, step into stiff boots, and grab the rifle. The metal's cold enough to sting your fingers through the mittens. You stand by the window, no glass, just a wooden shutter. You crack open a sliver and scan the tree line. Nothing, just shadows on snow. But that's the thing about frontier nights. You rarely see anything. You feel it. Somewhere, twigs snap, branches groan. You imagine glowing eyes, low shapes slinking between trees. Maybe it's just your imagination. Maybe not. You clutch the musket tighter anyway. It's quiet inside. Everyone else is bundled up, faces barely visible under layers of quilts and pelts. A dog stirs but doesn't bark. That's either a good sign or a very bad one. Historically, families on the edge of settled land dealt with wolves, mountain lions, even bears coming up to the cabin during winter. Not out of aggression, but hunger. Deep, desperate hunger. Livestock was an easy target. So was the smokehouse, the henhouse, or whatever unlucky goat you'd tied up too close to the barn. Some folks built wolf pens, traps baited with meat, lined with sharpened sticks. Others just kept fire burning all night and hoped the animals respected the unspoken agreement.
You stay out there, we stay alive. You shift your feet on the wood floor. It creaks like a shout in the stillness.
Suddenly, a silhouette moves by the shed. You freeze. Your breath stops. You raise the rifle, but it's just snow sliding off the roof. Your heartbeat eventually returns from orbit. Funny thing, people talk a lot about bravery on the frontier. But this isn't bravery. It's tiredness. It's repetition. It's standing in the dark every night with a gun and praying the sounds are wind and not teeth. The lantern flickers. You put a little oil in it and set it by the window. Not for light, for presence. A glowing eye to warn anything watching that someone inside is awake. It's your version of a scarecrow. You sit near the hearth, now glowing red with coals. You poke it absently with a stick, watching embers swirl like tiny ghosts. Every so often, you walk the floor, creak by creak, checking doors, windows, the wood pile. It's a slow ritual, soothing even. Until a noise jolts you again. The chickens. They're clucking. Something's at the coop. You yank on your boots, throw your coat over your shoulders, and step outside. The air hits you like a slap, dry and sharp, straight to the lungs. Your nostrils burn. Your boots crunch into the snow. You grip the rifle tighter. Out near the coop, you see movement, something small and fast. Possum. Maybe a raccoon, or just a stray wind knocking loose branches. Either way, you bang the barrel of your rifle against the coop wall, hard. The sound echoes across the clearing. Whatever it was, it's gone now. You wait. Then you wait some more. Silence. You trudge back to the cabin, boots wet now. You stomp them off and return to the hearth, shaking. Not from fear, from the cold. You peel off the coat and sit again, cradling a tin mug of water, wishing it were whiskey, or hot cider, or lava. And here's something curious. Some frontier families slept with bells attached to the door, homemade burglar alarms. Others tied strings to chicken coops that led directly to their bedpost. If a raccoon jiggled the coop, the string would tug their pillow. Primitive, sure. Effective, absolutely. Historians still debate whether these tactics were more psychological than practical. After all, how much sleep do you lose just waiting for that bell to ring? You poke the fire again. It answers with a hiss. The shadows dance across the walls. You swear one of them flinches. You stare harder. Nope. Just your coat on the hook. Eventually, your shift ends, not because someone relieves you, but because exhaustion wins. You shuffle back to bed, slide under the quilt, and immediately feel like a thawing potato. But even as you drift off, your ears stay half awake, listening. And then, just before sleep takes you, there's a noise. Scrape. You sit up. No wind this time. That was definitely something on the porch. Your eyes snap open again. That sound, scrape, wasn't a dream. You wait, still as a snow-covered stump, ears straining in the dark. Another scrape. Closer now. You don't even bother slipping on your boots this time. You grab the musket, barrel cold, and tiptoe to the door. Your breath fogs instantly, curling in the lantern glow. The cabin's dead silent behind you. Everyone else still cocooned in quilts, unaware or pretending to be. You lift the latch, crack the door an inch, and freeze. Nothing. Then a thump. It's coming from the lean-to, where you store food and medicine. Now that's a problem. Winter out here is brutal, but it's not just the cold that kills, it's sickness, and you can't afford to lose your stores. Every root, every dried sprig of feverfew or pine bark could mean the difference between a nagging cough and your last breath. So, with numb feet and twitching nerves, you slip out the door. You find the culprit quickly. A raccoon the size of a small child is rooting around your supplies, trying to open a storage barrel with its creepy little hands. You stomp and shout. It bolts into the dark, and you mutter curses at its tail disappearing into the woods. You check the lean-to. It's cold enough to keep things preserved, but not sealed. Inside, jars of pickled vegetables rattle slightly as the wind howls. You check your precious pine resin and medicinal herbs, tied in tight bundles near the roof. Still there, still safe. You breathe again. Here's the truth. Sickness, during frontier winters, isn't just inconvenient. It's often fatal. No doctor, no nurse, no emergency number to call. If someone falls ill, the treatment is all on you. The most common winter enemy? Respiratory illness. Coughs turn wet, wet turns into wheezing, and wheezing becomes silence. And silence in a cabin where someone should be breathing, that's a sound you don't ever forget. You've got a few tricks up your sleeve. Pine needle tea, packed with vitamin C, tastes like lemony wood chips and helps with the sniffles. Slippery elm bark boiled into a slimy tea. Onion poultices slapped onto the chest. Bear fat rubbed on throats. Some even drank kerosene diluted in water, which sounds more like a dare than medicine. Historians still argue whether these treatments actually worked, or just gave people something to do while nature made up its mind. You remember a story. Old Mrs. Hanley down the road once swore by rabbit tallow salve mixed with turpentine for bronchitis. She survived 3 winters longer than anyone thought she would. Coincidence? Maybe. Miracle? Possibly. Disgusting? Definitely. Inside your cabin, you've got what passes for a medicine chest, an old tobacco tin with dried herbs, willow bark for pain, mustard seed for poultices, some crumpled instructions scribbled from your aunt who knew a woman who swore by it. It's not much, but it gives you the illusion of control. That illusion matters. You've seen how fast it hits. One of the kids starts coughing, then another. You try to keep the cabin aired out, but every time you crack a window, the warmth escapes like a scared mouse. So you compromise, burn dried juniper branches to cleanse the air. The smoke stings the eyes, but it feels cleaner. When fever hits, you bundle them up tight, rub snow on foreheads, boil bark and herbs like a frantic potion maker. And then you wait. You listen to every breath, every rattle. Sleep becomes negotiation. You rest in short shifts, head always near the sickbed, counting breaths, whispering prayers or threats if you're desperate enough. You boil more broth than you can afford to lose. You take smaller sips of your own. You pretend you're not watching the color drain from their face. And if they recover, it feels like you just outwitted death. 1 point for your side. But if they don't, you dig a hole in frozen earth while snow bites at your face and try to remember something good about the last time they smiled. There's a bitter truth here. Sometimes people died not from illness, but from the cures. Turpentine rubbed too strong. Whiskey dosed too heavy. A moldy poultice that made things worse. But you try anyway. Because what's the alternative? Even the basic stuff is risky. Diarrhea in winter. Deadly. You dehydrate fast, and the cold speeds up the spiral. You try to keep everyone drinking, but when the water freezes in the ladle, that's easier said than done. Let's talk about teeth. Yes, teeth. Tooth infections don't wait for spring. A rotten molar can kill you if the infection spreads. Frontier solution? Yanking it. Yourself. With pliers. Or, if you're lucky, a visiting peddler with a toolkit and questionable hygiene. One account tells of a woman in Ohio who had her tooth pulled with a bent spoon and strong liquor. She lived, the spoon didn't. There's no escaping it. Frontier winters are a test of endurance, not just against snow and starvation, but against sickness with no mercy. So when the fire burns low and someone coughs in their sleep, you listen. Not just to the sound, but to what kind of cough it is. Dry? Wet? Deep? Hollow. You've become an amateur doctor without asking for the title. And sometimes, despite all your tricks and potions and prayers, the only cure is warmth. So you hold them close, rub their back, whisper old songs, share the last bit of stew. Because sometimes, that's all you can do. Morning breaks slowly through frost-covered shutters. A pale gray light spills into the cabin, not warm, not cheerful, just enough to show you where the dust is and who's still asleep under what pile of blankets. The fire has dwindled again, as always, and the cold is back in full command. But before anyone else stirs, you hear it. Little footsteps. Bare, pattering across the wood floor. The kids are up. On the frontier, children don't get a pass just because it's 10 degrees inside the house. They may be small, but their lives are full of movement, chores, and just enough mischief to keep things interesting. You watch as one of them tiptoes over to the fire, pulls the quilt tighter around their shoulders, and starts poking at the embers with a stick. They're shivering, red-cheeked, hair wild like a startled squirrel. But they don't complain. Not anymore. You hand them a ladle of warm broth and give a little nod. That's the deal. You wake up, you earn your heat. Life for kids out here isn't a snowy postcard of sleigh rides and marshmallows. It's cracked hands from hauling water. It's chapped cheeks so red they shine. It's fingers stiff from tying knots, sweeping floors, and gathering firewood they can barely lift. One girl you know, barely 7, can strip the feathers from a chicken faster than you. Another carries a water pail nearly half her weight without spilling a drop. Kids grow up quick here. They have to. Their day starts with chores. Feed the chickens, if they're not frozen, crack the ice on the water trough, sweep the floor, roll more snow into a barrel for melting. If they complain, they get a look. Not a word, just a look. They learn fast, but somehow they still play. Not with toys, really. Not the way you'd imagine. There's no toy chest or battery-powered anything. They make their own fun. They carve dolls from wood scraps, tie twigs into miniature sleds, build elaborate forts in the snow using sticks, pine cones, and occasionally stolen laundry. They're bundled in mismatched layers, coats stitched from old quilts, scarves wrapped 3 times around their heads, mittens that look more like socks. One's wearing a hat that definitely used to be a sleeve. But they're laughing. That's the frontier paradox. It's grim, it's grueling, and the kids still find joy anyway. One historian once wrote, "Children in frontier settlements learned resilience by proximity, not by permission." That sounds academic, but really, it means if you saw your parents doing hard things every day, you just assumed that's what life was, and you learn to keep up. A baby cries inside. You duck back into the cabin, grab the warmest blanket, and wrap the little one tight. The nose is red again. Chapped, you reach for a jar of rendered lard, your universal cure-all, and smear a little under the nostrils. It smells like bacon and survival. Works wonders. Some mothers on the frontier swore by bear grease or tallow mixed with beeswax for chapped skin. Others used snow melt mixed with ash as a gentle scrub. And then there's the infamous goose grease diaper salve you try not to think about too hard. Historians still argue whether these methods were hygienic brilliance or a fast track to infection. But hey, it worked often enough. When the cabin gets too cramped, you send the older kids outside again. Not because you're cruel, but because there's not enough room for everyone to breathe, let alone move. And honestly, they prefer it. They play games in the snow, snow snakes, sled runs, and occasionally, very competitive icicle sword fights. One kid once made a crown out of frozen leaves and declared herself Queen of Frostland. You didn't argue. She had the look. Back indoors, you try to keep their minds busy. That's the secret to winter parenting, distraction. You teach them to braid cord, to read aloud by candlelight, to sew rag dolls or twist paper into curls. Every small task is a little anchor to keep them from drifting into cabin fever. Sometimes you tell stories, sometimes you make them up. There's one about a talking squirrel who outwitted a frost giant, another about a snow spirit who rewards children who don't whine. They love those. You suspect they know you're bluffing, but they let you keep the magic. You remember your own childhood winters, not softer, just smaller. You didn't understand half the danger then. You just remember the warmth of bodies close by, the glow of fire on wood, the scratchy wool of your mother's shawl. Now you're the one holding the shawl, wearing the tired eyes. You glance outside again. The sky's gone lead gray, snow on the way. You call the kids in, one by one. They stomp their boots, knock snow from their hats, and crowd near the hearth. You pass around warm broth, small chunks of jerky, a piece of flatbread saved for today. They eat with the intensity of champions. Later, as they sleep in the nest of blankets, you tuck the smallest one in tighter. Their cheeks are finally pink from warmth, not windburn. They sigh in their sleep, and you realize something. In this life of cold, hunger, and uncertainty, keeping the children warm is its own kind of victory. Even if you have to grease their faces and sacrifice your only clean blanket, the blizzard doesn't knock. It slams. One moment, the wind is a moaning whisper through the trees. The next, it roars like a freight train that hasn't been invented yet. Snow slashes sideways across the clearing, and all you can do is stare out the small crack in the shutter and mutter something that feels like a prayer, but with more swear words. Inside, the cabin groans. You can feel it in the walls. The logs shift, creak, complain. The roof suddenly becomes the most important thing in your life. Storms like this come fast. 1 hour you're tending stew. The next, you're stacking buckets under the leaks and watching the walls sweat cold. The light vanishes, eaten by a curtain of white. Even the animals go silent, which is somehow worse than howling. You brace the door with the heavy bar. You shove blankets against the baseboards. Then you check the roof again. Last month, you reinforced the rafters with fresh beams, thankfully, but that won't stop the snow from accumulating. See, snow isn't just pretty. It's heavy, and if it stacks too high, your roof turns into a pancake. You grab a pole, long and crooked, once used for beans, and jam it up against the underside of the ceiling. Every hour, you jab upward, knocking loose any snow above. It's crude, it's awkward, it's your insurance plan. Some folks built cabins with steeply sloped roofs to avoid this exact situation. Others, not so lucky, ended up with their roofs caving in during the night, dumping icy doom onto their sleeping families. One New Hampshire settler reportedly lost half his pantry and 3 chickens in a single collapse. The chickens lived. The beans did not. Historians still argue whether these collapses were due to poor construction or just the unrelenting force of nature. You suspect a little of both. You peek out the door, just a crack. Snow whips in and slaps your face like a frosty insult. You shut it fast. You're officially trapped. Inside, condensation starts freezing on the interior walls. The warm air from your breath turns to frost on the nails. You can draw on the windows with your fingertip, and you do, briefly, just to remember you're still a person. The fire's burning, but it's losing the battle. You throw on more logs than you probably should. You've done the math. You know you don't have enough wood for the whole storm. But you also know your kid's nose is purple, and that's a more pressing equation. You gather everyone close. You shift the blankets into a single massive pile, a fortress of warmth. It's chaotic, crowded, smells like feet and stew and smoke, but it's safe. The cabin shakes. Somewhere above, you hear a thud. Could be snow sliding off the roof. Could be something worse. You don't check. You just press your palm to the wall and hope it holds. Someone asks if it's dinner time. You laugh. Then you feed them Tuesday stew again. Hours pass. Maybe days. It's hard to tell. You nap in turns. The wind is a lullaby for no one. Sometimes it screams. Other times it goes eerily quiet. That's when it's worst, when you think it might be over, but it's just regrouping. Eventually, nature knocks on the door again. Literally. A sharp crack, followed by a gust, then a crash from the rear of the cabin. You jump to your feet. Run. The rear wall has bowed inward slightly. A stack of stored firewood has shifted. Nothing's broken, yet, but the message is clear. This place wasn't made for forever. You reposition the logs, reinforce the support beams with whatever you've got. Chairs, crates, even your old bedpost. You consider sleeping standing up, but that feels overly dramatic. Back by the hearth, the stew pot boils again, mostly water now, with one floating carrot that looks like it gave up last week. No one complains. The heat from the pot is enough to raise spirits. You tell a story. You make it up as you go, about a brave raccoon who builds a snow fort and saves a village. The kids eat it up. Not the stew, the story, but they smile. That's something. And then, in the middle of your tale, the roof gives a sudden crack. Silence. Then snow. Not a full collapse, but a corner of the roof has let go. Snow pours in like a waterfall of frozen cotton. You shout. Everyone scrambles. You cover the hole with a board, a hide, a prayer. You shovel snow with a soup pot. It's chaos, cold, panic. But eventually the flow stops. You plug the gap with everything you have. The kids huddle together, wide-eyed but calm. You wrap them in extra layers. You press your back to the patched wall and breathe. You survived the worst part. Probably. The storm goes on for another day. You ration everything. You keep the fire alive with splinters and bark. You burn the broken stool. You consider burning the book you found in the crawl space, but decide against it. Not because it's valuable, but because it's the only one left. And then, one morning, the wind dies. The cabin is silent. You open the door to a blinding world, snow piled higher than the windows, trees bent under its weight. The outhouse? Gone. Just gone. You stare at the horizon, stunned by the brightness, the weight of everything you just endured. Your breath fogs gently. Then someone behind you says, "I have to pee." Of course they do. The storm may have passed, but winter hasn't gone anywhere. It's just showing off its quieter side now, sunlight bouncing off endless white, the kind of dazzling brightness that makes your eyes water before you even step outside. You squint through the cabin doorway and wonder how the sun can look so cheerful while the world still feels like a giant icebox. And now comes the dressing ritual. You're heading out to check on the traps and maybe fetch what's left of the outhouse, assuming it's not halfway to Canada. But before you do that, it's time to armor up. Layer 1, scratchy underthings. Maybe linen, maybe homespun wool, whatever you've got that isn't frozen stiff. Layer 2, pants over pants. Layer 3, every shirt you own. Layer 4, your coat, which you're fairly sure weighs more than one of your children. And finally, grease. Yes, grease. You rub bare fat, or tallow, if that's what's left, onto your cheeks, nose, even the backs of your hands. It keeps the wind from turning your skin into paper. You look ridiculous. You smell like roasted sadness, but it works. Quirky tidbit. Some frontier folks swore by goose grease mixed with beeswax and soot. Supposedly made your skin waterproof and gave you a handsome charcoal glow. Historians still argue whether it helped or just made you look like a chimney sweep with confidence. On your head goes the crown jewel of winter fashion, the skunk hat. It's real. You made it yourself. It still has the tail. And no, it does not smell anymore. Mostly. Out the door you go. The snow crunches like stale crackers beneath your boots. You're grateful you tied ropes around your pants. They'd freeze solid otherwise. Some folks even sewed foot wraps from old flour sacks and wore them over their boots, creating makeshift snow gaiters. Surprisingly effective, and very stylish if you're into the just survived a small avalanche look. Your breath trails behind you like smoke from a tiny, worried steam engine. First stop, the woodpile. It's buried. You find it by stabbing the snow with a stick until you hear the telltale thunk of frozen bark. You dig, hands going numb, and pull out a few logs, now damp and heavy. You'll need to dry them by the hearth before they'll burn properly. Again. Back indoors, everyone's doing the half-laundry, half-layered routine. One kid's wearing a shirt as pants. Another has turned a scarf into a vest. Your partner is stuffing more hay into their boots with a look that says, "Don't talk to me about fashion right now." The biggest challenge? Gloves. Good gloves were rare. Great gloves were legendary. So you make do. Rabbit fur mitts, lined with whatever cloth you could spare. Sometimes you stuff your hands into pockets and just pretend you're warm. Other times, you use heated stones or a tin of coals in a handheld box. That last one's risky. One slip, and suddenly you're explaining to your children why we don't set our mittens on fire. Next chore, check the cabin roof. After the last collapse, you're not taking any chances. You grab your ladder, really just a nailed-together bundle of regret, and prop it against the eave. As you climb, each step creaks like it's asking for mercy. You reach the top, brush snow off the edge, and assess. Still holding for now. You give it a few taps with your pole, dislodge another foot of snow, and watch it fall like a soft, silent avalanche. Clothing repair comes next. Your coat has a tear under the armpit where it's snagged on the barn latch, and one boot has officially declared itself a slipper. You grab your sewing kit, a few bent needles, horsehair thread, a thimble that doesn't fit. You sit by the window, stitching in the weak winter light. This is where the rhythm returns. Layer, patch, warm, relayer. Someone breaks a button? You carve a new one from bone. Mittens get a hole? You darn it with leftover yarn from a sock that froze stiff and snapped in half 2 weeks ago. You're not fashion forward, you're fashion desperate. But you make it work. Every piece of clothing has a history now. That patched quilted coat, made from your old bedroll. The scarf, from the curtain that used to hang in the smokehouse. The hat, from the raccoon who kept trying to steal your bacon. The revenge was personal and cozy. Fun fact, some families made entire cloaks from multiple animal hides, stitched together with sinew. It wasn't elegant, but it was warm. You once saw a traveling trapper with a cloak made entirely of rabbit skins. He called it the fluffle. You never asked. And then there's grease, again. You melt some more tallow and start rubbing it on your boots to waterproof the seams. It's sticky, smelly, and makes your hands feel like you've wrestled a roast duck. But come thaw season, when others are limping in wet socks, you'll be dry-footed and smug. One scholar wrote that frontier fashion was a function of friction, fat and fur. They weren't wrong. Back at the hearth, you lay out the damp clothing near the fire to dry. Carefully. You still remember last month's mitten incident. 1 minute, it was drying. The next minute, it was ablaze and spinning across the floor like a fuzzy fireball. You hang socks from the mantel, hide gloves in your coat for warmth, and wrap a scarf around your waist like a belt. The longer the winter drags on, the more your outfit looks like a patchwork museum of survival tactics. And still, you're warm. Sort of. The wind howls again outside. You press your hands to the window shutter. It's not cold inside, not like before. The clothes, the layers, the grease, the vigilance, it all adds up. It doesn't beat winter, but it outlasts it. And out here, that's enough. The river is frozen. Not just crusted over, solid. White, silent. Like a sleeping monster you hope doesn't stir beneath your boots. You stand at its edge, peering across the ice-covered expanse. The snow lies thick and clean over it, but that only makes it more dangerous. Because under that perfect white blanket is a guessing game of life and death. You take a step. The ice groans. It always does. Frontier families crossed frozen rivers all the time, because they had to. It was faster than trudging around for miles, and in some areas, it was the only road in winter. Frozen water became highways, shortcuts, and supply routes. But they weren't without risk. You test each step with a long stick, a pole you cut and carry just for this purpose. It pokes ahead, jabbing the ice, searching for soft spots, cracks, betrayal. You're not being paranoid. You remember the stories. Your neighbor fell through 2 winters ago while dragging a sled of dry cornmeal. Went under so fast, the only thing that came back up was his hat. He lived, somehow, but the cornmeal didn't. You still talk about it every time someone makes a bad stew. The ice shifts again beneath you. A deep, hollow sound. Like the earth holding its breath. You keep walking. Slowly. Some frontier families had better luck. They'd use sleighs, pulled by horses fitted with spiked shoes to grip the ice. Others pushed sleds themselves, wearing cleats made from nails hammered into leather soles. You've just got determination and this pole. Historians still argue about the thickness of safe ice. Some say 3 inches for people, 5 for sleds, more for horses. But on the frontier, no one had a tape measure. You trusted your gut, the weather, and the sound of the ice when it talked back. You crossed safely this time. Just a few supplies stashed in a cache on the far bank, dried apples, a spare axe head, a little sack of barley you'd buried last fall. You dig through the snow, find the marker, a branch bent in a crooked arch, and pull your cache free, frozen, but intact. The return trip is faster, lighter, and still terrifying. You reach the cabin again and breathe. But the river, it's not done with you. There's another trip tomorrow, and the next day. Always something to fetch, check, trade, or retrieve before the ice thaws, because when the melt begins, all bets are off. There's a brief window, dangerous, deceptive, where the ice looks solid but softens from beneath. That's when people disappear. One settler called it the season of regret. You remember that from last year too. Another family lost their wagon through a spot that had thawed too thin. Lost a mule too. Only one boot floated back up the next day, so you stay cautious, superstitious even. Some folks place charms on their sleds, bits of iron, little wood carvings, scraps of old maps. Others swore by rituals: 3 steps forward, 1 step back, tap the pole twice, then move. It sounds silly until you realize how many didn't make it across. There's something mystical about a frozen river. It feels ancient, like a frozen breath from time itself. You walk on it with reverence, not just because it's dangerous, but because it demands respect. You come back into the cabin, cheeks raw, fingers stiff. The kids help you remove the layers. They know the drill. You lay your gloves out to dry. You sip hot broth with shaking hands. You don't speak for a minute. Everyone knows that look. It's the Riverwalk look. They've seen it before. Your partner hands you a warm stone. You hold it tight, letting the heat seep back into your bones. And then someone says it. You ever think about building a bridge? You all laugh. Loud. Hard. Maybe a little too long. Because building a bridge over that river would take a miracle, and 4 dozen able bodies, and iron tools, and time, none of which you have. So, instead, you hope the ice stays solid just long enough to get through this season. You keep your pole by the door. You listen to the weather. You trust your instincts. And you prepare. Because even in winter's stillness, the world is always moving underneath. And sometimes, it moves right out from under your feet. The snow is waist deep, the sky hangs heavy, and the trail to your neighbor's cabin is nearly invisible. But today, you're going anyway. You bundle up like you're preparing for battle. Mittens, scarves, extra layers, a warm stone stuffed in your coat, just for morale. Your legs already ache at the thought of slogging through drifts, but the cabin's grown too quiet. Too small. Too still. Out here, the cure for cabin fever is conversation. So you dig out the path 1 boot at a time. Snow crunches, creaks, sighs beneath your weight. Each step forward feels like 10. The wind slaps your face just to remind you who's in charge. Still, you press on, because the Bennetts have whiskey. That's not why you're going, of course. But also, yes it is. The trip takes almost an hour. You arrive looking like a frost-covered scarecrow, cheeks flushed, eyebrows full of snow. You stomp off your boots and knock 3 times on their rough-hewn door. When it opens, warm air hits your face like a memory. And then comes the best part of winter, company. Inside, it's the same cabin you remember. Wood smoke, dried herbs, a quilt nailed over the doorway. The Bennetts greet you like royalty. Not because you're special, but because visitors are rarer than fresh eggs these days. You settle in by the fire, and soon the ritual begins. A hot drink, maybe weak tea, maybe stronger. This time, it's whiskey cut with a little warm water. Smooth. Burns slightly. Feels like life returning to your chest. You lean back, steam rising from your mittens, and finally exhale. This is survival too. See, winter on the frontier isn't just about food and firewood. It's about spirit. And nothing keeps the soul intact like shared stories and a sip of something strong. The Bennetts bring out what they have: bread, some jerky, a few turnip slices. You reciprocate with a tin of spruce sugar and a heel of cornbread from yesterday's stew fest. The kids play quietly in the corner with homemade dolls, while the adults trade news like gold. Did the river freeze solid yet? How's your firewood holding out? Any more wolf tracks near the barn? It's not gossip, it's survival intel. One of the boys at the Bennett place had frostbite last week, just 2 toes, and they caught it early. A neighbor down the ridge lost a roof beam. The storm took part of the smokehouse. You nod. Make mental notes. Every bit of news helps you feel a little more in control of an uncontrollable season. Historians often write about how isolation shaped frontier communities. But here, you feel the truth of it. These visits weren't social calls, they were lifelines. A hot drink, a quiet moment, the simple act of being seen. There's laughter too. Always. Someone tells the story of the goat that got stuck in the stovepipe. Again, someone else does their terrible impression of the traveling peddler who tried to sell frozen buttons as ice-proof fasteners. You laugh too hard. It feels good. And then someone brings out the fiddle. It's slightly out of tune. One string is replaced with twine. But when the first notes rise, the cabin becomes something else, softer, fuller. Feet tap. Heads nod. Even the wind outside seems to hush for a moment. Music in winter is sacred. It lifts the weight off your shoulders, even if just for a minute. Some folks even held dances in larger cabins, pushing the furniture to the corners and stomping until the floorboards begged for mercy. Quirky fact: one diary from 1842 describes a snowbound dance where they used frozen apples as maracas. They exploded. Spirits were high anyway. By mid-afternoon, it's time to go. The sun's already low, and you don't want to cross the snowfield in the dark. You wrap your scarf tighter and accept one more swig of whiskey for the road. The Bennets press a bundle into your hand, dried beans, wrapped in cloth. You offer them a bit of beeswax in return. No money ever changes hands, just kindness. You step out into the fading light. The sky is streaked with pale gold. The path is barely visible, but your feet remember the way. Back at home, the cabin is a welcome sight, despite the draft and the soot and the lingering smell of boiled cabbage. Your partner greets you with raised eyebrows and a smirk that says, "Did they give you actual whiskey, or just fermented maple sap again?" You shrug. You're smiling anyway. The fire crackles. The kids have invented a new game involving mittens and pine cones, and you feel something warm settle into your chest. Connection. Because sometimes the thing that gets you through a long winter isn't fur-lined boots or extra stew. It's a short walk through deep snow to hear someone say, "Glad you made it." The cold doesn't wait. The morning after your visit to the Bennets, you're already up before dawn, tugging on your boots and heading for the trapline. This isn't a lazy walk in the woods. It's a mission. And your fingers are already regretting it. Out here, trapping is less about trade and more about not starving. Rabbit, squirrel, weasel, whatever ends up in the snare gets cleaned, cooked, and possibly turned into mittens. Nothing is wasted. If you're lucky, today you'll bring home something with fur and protein. If you're really lucky, it won't bite you on the way back. Your snowshoes are laced tight. They creak as you move, stretched rawhide frames tied with fraying cord, passed down from whoever first thought walking on top of snow sounded like a good idea. They work. Mostly. You still sink a little, but at least you're not waist deep. The woods are quiet. Not peaceful, more like watching. The trees stand tall and silent, like a frozen jury. Your breath puffs clouds into the sharp air, and each footstep sounds louder than it should. Your traps are strung along a rough path you carved back in October. Wire snares for rabbits, small spring traps for mink. You check them one by one. Empty. Empty. Then, success. A snowshoe hair. Caught clean, still warm. You whisper thanks, not because it's tradition, but because it feels right. You cradle the body, already planning tonight's stew. Maybe even fry the liver. That's the luxury cut. You keep going. 3 more snares. One sprung, empty. Another frozen shut. The last one holds something strange. You approach carefully. A weasel. It snarls even in death, its tiny body coiled like it never stopped fighting. You lift it gently. The fur's fine, could make a lining, maybe a pouch. You think of those trapper tales, cloaks made of 100 weasels, stitched with sinew, worn with ridiculous pride. You won't be that fancy. But hey, maybe a hat. Historians still debate whether trapping was primarily economic or survival-based in early frontier communities. Some families trapped for pelts to sell at spring markets. Others did it because fresh meat was otherwise a fantasy. You're in the latter camp. You head home slowly, traps reset, prize in hand. By the time you reach the cabin, your feet are numb again. You stomp them by the door, hang the animals from the eaves to cool, and step inside. The fire greets you like an old friend. You skin the rabbit first. Quick work, your hands moving from muscle memory. The pelt peels clean. You hang it near the hearth, pinned with a few old nails to stretch it. The meat goes into the pot. Bones too. You'll boil it down until everything's soft enough to eat or turn to broth. The kids gather to watch. You explain each step. They already know most of it. Hands-on biology class since age 5. But the ritual matters. Next comes the weasel, more delicate. Trickier to skin without tearing. You do your best. The tail rips, of course. Always does. You sigh. The kids giggle. You glare, but it's half-hearted. Later, while the stew simmers, you clean your rifle. Carefully. The cold makes metal brittle, and moisture means rust. You run a rag through the barrel, check the flint, re-wrap it in oiled cloth. It's an extension of you, and you treat it with more care than your own boots. Probably too much. Because you'll need it again soon. Hunting's not a choice, it's survival. You remember last winter, tracking a buck through 3 feet of snow, losing it for hours, finally spotting it just past the tree line, motionless. You raised your rifle, heart pounding, and click. Misfire. The powder had frozen. You spent 2 hours crying and cursing into your gloves, and another 3 hiking home empty-handed. Lesson learned. You keep powder dry now, tucked in a tin inside your coat, next to your chest. Body heat keeps it usable. Risky if you fall in a stream, but that's the gamble. Speaking of which, you still remember the time you did fall in. It was the stream near Widow Merrill's place. The ice gave way like paper, and you went under up to your chest. You were out in seconds, but soaked. You stripped and sprinted home in boots, socks, and raw panic. You made it. Barely. Another 5 minutes, and you might have frozen before reaching the cabin. Now, every trapline run includes extra socks, a dry rag, and the memory of that terrible chill crawling up your spine. Back at the fire, the stew is nearly done. You add dried mushrooms, a pinch of salt saved from spring. You stir slowly, savoring the aroma. It's earthy, gamey, and real. You hand out bowls, thin wood, slightly cracked. Everyone gathers around. You chew slowly. The meat is tough, but satisfying. The kids ask what it is. You say, dinner. Because out here, you don't ask for names. You just say thanks. Outside, the snow glows blue under a moonless sky. Inside, the cabin is still. Even the fire has quieted to embers. You sit alone, wrapped in a quilt, listening to the soft rhythm of winter breathing through the cracks in the walls. This is when it gets to you. Not the cold, not the hunger, not the aching in your hands from chopping wood or skinning game. It's the waiting, the silence, the emptiness. You stare at the shuttered window and think about spring. Not the cartoon version with tulips and butterflies, but your version. The kind with half-melted snowbanks, muddy trails, and the first drop of water trickling through the roof. It feels impossibly far away, so you go to the shelf, pull down the hymn book. It's tattered, water-stained, missing the back cover. You open to a familiar page, not because it's your favorite, but because the creases fall right there. You hum the tune before the words come. Quiet, barely louder than the wind. The song drifts through the cabin like a breath of something older than pain. The kids stir in their sleep. One mumbles a name you don't recognize. You smile. Faith isn't flashy out here. There are no stained glass windows, no choirs, just a cracked hymnal, a melted candle, and a voice tired from keeping everyone alive. Some families read scripture at dawn, others at night. Yours? You save it for the hardest days, like today, when the stew boiled down to bone water and the woodpile gave you a splinter and a splintered heart. A long time ago, someone told you faith was the only thing that didn't freeze in winter. At the time, you rolled your eyes. Now, you're not so sure. You whisper the last line of the hymn, and guide us through the storm. The room is still. For a moment, You swear the cabin breathes with you. Spiritual life on the frontier wasn't an add-on. It was a thread woven through every frozen morning and every uncertain night. Most folks had a Bible tucked under the bed or nailed to the wall. But belief wasn't just about God. It was about hope, about trusting that your aching, frost-bitten hands weren't working for nothing. You look up at the low ceiling, where candlelight flickers across the beams. Your eyes catch the makeshift cross you carved months ago. 2 sticks tied with rawhide. Simple, bare, true. The kids wake slowly. One starts singing the hymn you'd hummed. The others join in, voices shaky but sweet. It sounds like home. When the hymn fades, stories take its place. Old tales from your childhood, half-remembered fables, and fresh ones you've invented just to see them smile. There's the one about the fox who outsmarted the wind, or the elk who learned to sing, or the snow spirit who only visited houses where someone was still humming at night. They love that one. Evenings like this are rare in the deep freeze of winter. No chores, no emergencies, just time, soft conversation. A fire that burns without begging. You pull out the little carving you've been working on. A horse, or maybe a bear. Hard to say. It's still a block of stubborn wood, but you shave off a sliver here and there, smoothing the edges, giving it shape. One of the kids asks what it is. You say, "We'll know when it's done." They nod like that makes perfect sense. Quirky fact: some settlers believed that carving by firelight kept evil spirits away. The rhythmic scrape of blade on wood was a kind of lullaby for the home. Others just did it to keep their hands busy and their thoughts from unraveling. Historians still argue whether these traditions were cultural remnants from Europe or improvised comforts born in the wilderness. You tuck the carving away, bank the fire with the last dry log, and lie back against the wall. Outside, the sky is turning. You can't see it, but you feel it. The air has a faint softness, a whisper of change. Maybe it's your imagination. Maybe it's a trick. Or maybe the season is shifting. You close your eyes and think of dirt. Not just any dirt, spring dirt. Wet, fragrant, sticky between your fingers. Earthworms thawing roots, the smell of green coming back to life. You can't smell it yet, but you remember it. And that memory is enough to carry you forward. Faith, after all, doesn't always look like strength. Sometimes it's just singing when you're tired. Or planting seeds you may never see sprout. You fall asleep humming, with sawdust under your fingernails and warmth in your chest. There's no announcement, no trumpet, no lightning bolt from the heavens. Just a drip. Then another. Then 5 more, plunking steadily into the empty soup pot you left by the fire. The thaw has begun. You wake to the sound of snow melt ticking against the roof and trickling down through the same crack you tried to seal with pine pitch back in December. It's not glamorous. It's not even especially welcome. Not yet. But it's here. You step outside and squint at a world that feels new, though it's still mostly white. The air is different, wetter, softer, thick with scent. Snow is sloughing off the trees in heavy clumps. Water rushes in tiny rivulets along the trail, cutting little gullies through the packed snowbanks. And the mud? Oh, the mud. It swallows your boots in seconds, clinging to your ankles like a hungry beast. You laugh, because what else is there to do? Winter gave you cracked skin, numb fingers, frozen stew. Spring has brought you swamp shoes. Progress. But make no mistake, this next part is brutal too. You peel the top off the woodpile, only to discover half of it has rotted under the weight of months of snow and thaw. Mushy, mold-streaked logs. You sigh. The firewood was supposed to last through April. Now you'll be lucky if it gets you through the week. Inside, the cabin smells different. Not smoke and meat and wool. Now it smells like wet, like damp bark and old hay. The blankets are heavier, the walls sweat with condensation, and the floor is once again very much alive. You stomp your boots and hope no one sees the mushrooms growing near the hearth. The kids try to go outside barefoot and instantly regret it. Their feet come back coated in cold sludge. You scold half-heartedly while handing them warm rags. It's tradition. The animals are louder now. The chickens start pecking near the bare patches of earth. A rabbit streaks through the clearing. The squirrels return with their usual judgmental stares, and the dog has finally started barking at real things again. Everything is waking up. You check the roof. A corner beam sags, water drips steadily into a cracked bucket below. You patch it temporarily with an old quilt and some hope. You'll need to replace the entire thing come summer. That thought makes you want to sit down and cry. Or nap. Possibly both. Spring is rebirth, sure. But before the flowers, there's rot. The outhouse reappears from beneath its snowdrift, and let's just say, it did not come through winter looking like a hero. You make a mental note, reinforce the walls, dig a new pit, maybe light some incense. A lot of incense. The garden's still under snow, but you start prepping anyway. You sharpen tools, clean last year's seed tins, and dream about green things. Peas, turnips, beans, nothing fancy. Just something that doesn't come out of a jar or stew pot. One quirky tradition you remember. Your grandmother always planted a single bean in a jar on the first day of melt, set it on the windowsill, and said, "If it sprouts, we'll survive." It always did. You wonder now if she swapped the beans when no one was looking, just to keep everyone sane. Historians still debate how much folklore and quiet rituals shaped survival versus sheer hard labor. But you know the truth. Both mattered. The work kept the body alive. The little superstitions kept the soul stitched together. You head out to the storage shed, half expecting disaster. And yep, it's a disaster. The roof's caved in slightly. One barrel of potatoes is mush. A bag of flour has become a mouse hotel. But a small stash of dried apples survived, and the fishing gear is intact. You smile. In a few weeks, the river will break. You'll fish again, maybe even catch something bigger than a boot. You look around at what's left. The snow is melting fast now, dripping from every tree, soaking into the earth like a slow apology. The cabin leans a little more than it did in January. The fences need mending. The chickens have already escaped twice this morning. The barn door squeaks like it wants to retire. But the sun is up. The real sun. Not just light, warmth. You roll your shoulders. The aches are still there, but something deeper has shifted. You made it. You carried your people through the long frozen dark. There's work ahead, so much work it hurts to think about, but the weight of winter is lifting. You breathe deep. Mud, damp bark, stale hay, smoke, spring. It doesn't look like victory, but it feels like it. The fire is low now, not out, just resting. A soft orange flicker against the cabin walls, barely enough to cast shadows. You lie back, eyes half closed, wrapped in the weight of wool and fatigue. Outside, the last drops of melting snow patter onto the roof, each one a quiet metronome reminding you the coldest part is over. Your body aches. But the kind of ache that says you lived through it. You picture the cabin from above, a small rectangle of warmth in a forest still waking up. The smoke from your chimney rising like a whisper, the garden thawing under a pale sky, the outline of snowshoes by the door. You've survived the longest nights, the storm that clawed at your roof, the illness that passed through like a shadow, the stew that stretched too far and tasted of everything and nothing. And now, in this fragile moment between seasons, you rest. You let go of the counting, the chopping, the endless repetition of just one more day, because you've done it. And tomorrow, the sun will rise earlier. You hum a hymn under your breath, the one that kept coming back to you in the dark. The kids are asleep. The wind has stilled. There's no ceremony to survival, no medals, just warmth, silence, and breath. You pull the blanket higher, feel the weight of the night settle into your bones, and this time it's gentle. Spring will come, but for now, just sleep.